How do I find financial aid to study meteorology?
Other than contacting your university's meteorology department and its financial aid office. A good place to look for scholarships, fellowships, and internships is the American Meteorological Society. The National Council of Industrial Meteorologists also provides stipends to undergraduates. Finally, the U.S. Navy and Air Force both offer programs in meteorology for those who attend. The Reserve Officers Training Corps, ROTC, in college, and then go to officer training school. Your education is then paid for by the military.
What causes thunder?
Thunder is created when lightning rapidly heats a section of air. As the air expands, it compresses, releasing the energy as a sound wave that we hear as a loud boom or clap of thunder.
Do tornadoes strike in countries other than the United States and Canada?
Yes, but the United States keeps the best records on tornadoes. And so it is difficult to ascertain the frequency and ferocity of twisters in foreign nations. The Canadian prairie experiences significant incidents. But one could say that these are all part and parcel of the North American conditions that are ideal for tornado formation. Other countries that have significant accounts of tornado activity include Great Britain, Italy, Western France, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, Bangladesh, China, Northern India, Pakistan, Japan, South Africa, and New Zealand. England experiences a tornado about once every year and a half, and Australia probably has more tornadoes than are witnessed. Because many of them likely occur in the outback, where the population is sparse.
Which is more deadly, tornadoes or lightning?
More people in the United States die from being struck by lightning than from a tornado. About 80 people die annually from tornadoes, while more than 100 perish after a lightning stroke, on average.
What is the ideal relative humidity that is the most comfortable for people?
A humidity level between 30 and 60% is generally considered comfortable for human beings, while keeping humidity below 50% has the added benefit of keeping dust mites under control in homes. Lower humidities tend to lead to dry or cracked skin, itching, and even respiratory problems, and higher humidity causes perspiration to be less effective in controlling body temperature, which makes people feel hotter. In northern climates, where winter dries out the air, humidity can drop below 5%, which is comparable to the humidity levels of a desert.
What is a Siberian Express?
This term describes outbreaks of Arctic air that are severely cold. They descend from northern Canada and Alaska to other parts of the United States.
About how many tornadoes are recorded in the United States annually?
A typical tornado season sees about 800 tornadoes in the United States. However, better observational techniques, including advanced Doppler radar and growing numbers of tornado chasers, has led to increases in tornado observations since around 1990. So this official average might go up.
What major gases do volcanoes emit?
Volcanic gases contained within the magma, molten rock, are released as they reach the Earth's surface, escaping at the major volcanic opening or from fissures and vents along the side of the volcano. The most prevalent gases are carbon dioxide, CO2, and hydrogen sulfide, H2S. Carbon dioxide is a dangerous gas, it is invisible and odorless, and can kill within minutes. One example in which volcanic gases proved dangerous involved the Dieng volcano complex, or Dieng Plateau, in Java, Indonesia. It consists of 2 volcanoes and over 20 craters and cones, and is noted for its poisonous gas emissions at some craters. In 1979, at least 149 people were killed by poisonous gases as they fled eruptions at 2 of the craters, the Sinala and Sigludung.
How was Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham important to meteorology?
Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn, 965 c. 1039, was a brilliant scientist in many areas, including engineering, physics, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, anatomy, medicine, philosophy, psychology, and more. He has been called the father of modern optics and the founder of experimental physics, attesting to his many accomplishments. His 7-volume Book of Optics, 1011 to 1021. Explained principles with applications ranging from ophthalmology to astronomy to meteorology. As it pertains to meteorology, his work is important for explaining such concepts as reflection, refraction, transparency, translucence, radiancy, and optical illusions. Example: mirages. He made contributions to the study of rainbows and atmospheric density.
Why don't we see hurricanes in the South Atlantic Ocean?
The cold sea surface temperatures of the South Atlantic and atmospheric conditions, such as the tendency of the intertropical convergence zone to remain in the northern hemisphere, make hurricane formation south of the equator unlikely. However, in March 2004, a hurricane did strike the coast of Brazil, which was a very unusual event.
How is me scattering different from Rayleigh scattering?
Me scattering deals with energy waves by particles larger than the wavelengths of light, while Rayleigh scattering, named after English physicist John William Strutt, 3rd Baron Rayleigh 1842–1919, deals with how light is scattered by particles smaller than electromagnetic wavelengths. Me scattering can explain things like the reddish color of clouds during a sunset, scattering at the level of dust and water particles, while Rayleigh scattering explains why the sky is blue, scattering at the molecular level.
What could happen if permafrost melts permanently because of global warming?
The problem with global warming is that, as the process continues, it tends to use a rather ironic term, snowball and accelerate. A big reason for this was recently discovered as a result of permafrost and peat bog surveys being conducted in places like Scandinavia and Alaska. Here, land that was once covered in permafrost is thawing out and becoming wetlands. This might sound very nice, except that, stored beneath this layer of permafrost, is a buildup of centuries of methane gas created by decaying peat and other plant matter. Once this thaws, the methane will all be released into the atmosphere, increasing levels of methane by as much as 50% by some estimates.
Is Earth's atmosphere changing?
Earth's atmosphere is continually and gradually changing over cycles that usually last many thousands of years. The concentrations of different gases including oxygen, carbon dioxide, and others go up and down, as does the concentrations of tiny dust particulates such as carbon soot. In the past 100 years or so, human population growth and industrial activity has caused a much sharper change in the concentrations of some gases and particulates on a much shorter time scale than at any time in the past 200,000 years. The most dramatic effect has been a huge increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This increase has created a substantial greenhouse effect. According to some scientists, which could be increasing the average temperature on Earth at a much faster rate than typical ecological and geological time scales.
What are tornadoes?
Tornadoes are very powerful, yet tiny storms that have destructive winds capable of leveling buildings and other structures. Winds in a tornado form a dark gray column of air, though white, bluish, or even red is possible. Depending on how the sun's light rays might be reflecting off the tornado. With the center of the tornado acting like a vacuum, picking up objects and moving them along the storm's path. Tornadoes can last from a few minutes to an hour or more. They are one of the most destructive forces in nature, with the largest tornadoes sometimes having diameters of over 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, and wreaking a path of destruction over 100 miles, 160 kilometers, long.
What is NOAA Weather Radio?
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's weather radio is a 24-hour-a-day broadcast of weather conditions throughout the United States. About 90% of the lower 48 states are covered, including its territories. Working in conjunction with the Emergency Alert System and the Federal Communications Commission, as well as other federal, state, and local officials, weather radio also broadcasts warnings about other hazards, such as earthquakes and tsunamis, or environmental accidents, oil or chemical spills, for example, and public service announcements like Amber Alerts about missing children.
What causes a tornado to dissipate?
Just as the formation of tornadoes is not well understood, neither are the reason for why they disappear. One theory is that when colder air begins to flow out of the storm, the mesocyclone at the center of the storm becomes surrounded by cooler air, the tornado is robbed of sufficient energy and loses power. However, this is not a hard and fast rule, and cool air outflows have been observed that actually are followed by tornado formation.
Is the best time to see an aurora during the winter?
Seasons don't have anything to do with whether or not aurorae will occur over the polar regions. Rather, they are related to solar storms. However, it may be more likely that you will see aurorae during the winter because the nights are longer.
What is acid fog?
Acid fog is just like acid rain. When sulfur dioxide is present in the air, it can be captured by water vapors of all sorts, including fog. If this weren't bad enough, acid fog tends to be much more acidic than acid rain, up to 10 times as acidic. This acid fog, which can linger in the air for hours or even days, can be as bad as walking through clouds of floating vinegar and is very destructive to plant life. as well as building materials ranging from iron to concrete.
What is the tropopause?
He learned that, after about 7 miles, 11 kilometers, the air stopped becoming cooler and leveled off for as high as the balloons could go. He concluded that the atmosphere was divided into 2 layers, which he named the troposphere and the stratosphere. Later, in the 1920s, meteorologists Gordon Miller-Bourne Dobson, 1889 to 1976, and F. A. Lindemann, First Viscount Cherwell, 1886-1957, used studies of meteor trails to learn that temperatures warmed in the atmosphere as high as 30 miles, 48 kilometers, up. Dobson concluded that ultraviolet radiation absorbed by the ozone in the stratosphere was the reason for the warmer air.
How have weather-related forest fires created tragic disasters in the United States?
Dry, hot conditions and lightning have caused some of the most devastating forest fires in the United States. For example, on September 1, 1894, a heat wave in the Midwest led to a forest fire near Hinckley, Minnesota, where 400 people consequently lost their lives. And on October 8, 1871, the so-called Peshtigo fire killed 1,800 people in Michigan and Wisconsin. Northern climes are particularly vulnerable to forest fires caused by the weather. During Alaska's mild, dry summers, for instance, the state experiences a dramatic rise in forest fires.
How often does an aurora appear?
Because it depends on solar winds and sunspot activity, the frequency of an aurora cannot be predicted. Auroras usually appear 2 days after a solar flare, a violent eruption of particles on the sun's surface, and reach their peak 2 years into the 11-year sunspot cycle.
Can you use snow to keep you warm?
Snow, just like wood or stone or soil, can be used as an insulator. If there is sufficient snow on the ground, one can dig out a small cave or igloo-like structure, crawl inside of it, and wait for one's body heat to warm the inside. To work more efficiently, it is best to be 6 or more feet, 2 meters, below the surface, and keep the opening of your snow cave downwind. Such makeshift structures can warm up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit 15 degrees Celsius or more, and can be quite cozy. They are a good way to avoid exposure if one has become lost or stranded outdoors in the winter.
What is fire weather forecasting?
Fire weather forecasters concern themselves with studying rainfall, humidity, temperature, thunderstorms, wind and sunlight conditions that could leave areas such as forests and grasslands vulnerable to wildfires. These forecasts can prepare fire crews and other emergency support before a fire begins. And after fires begin, they can help professionals determine such things as the possible direction a fire will spread and whether or not an oncoming rainstorm might help put the fire out.
What is the moist tongue?
Sometimes meteorologists come up with some pretty fanciful descriptive terms. Moist tongue falls into that category. It refers to humid tropical air moving in the direction of either the North or South Pole. A moist tongue regularly occurs in the spring and summer over the U.S. Central Plains, where it works in conjunction with a jet stream to produce storms.
How was the existence of neutrinos proven?
The existence of neutrinos was first suggested in 1930 by the Austrian physicist Wolfgang Pauli, 1900 to 1958. He noticed that in a type of radioactive process called beta decay, the range of the total energy given off in observations was greater than theoretical predictions. He reasoned that there must be another type of particle present to account for and carry away some of this energy. Since the amounts of energy were so tiny, the hypothetical particle must be very tiny as well and have no electric charge. A few years later, the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi, 1901 to 1954, coined the name neutrino for this enigmatic particle. The existence of neutrinos was not experimentally confirmed, however, until 1956, when American physicists Clyde L. Cowan, Jr., 1919 to 1974, and Frederick Raines, 1918 to 1998, detected neutrinos at a special nuclear facility in Savannah River, South Carolina.
Are hailstones always round?
Usually, hailstones are round or lumpy round little ice balls. Sometimes, however, they can be oblong or have protruding spikes.
What is latent heat?
The concept of latent heat was discovered by Scottish chemist Joseph Black, 1728 to 1799, as well as independently, by Swiss meteorologist, geologist, and physicist Jean-André Deluc, 1727 to 1817. When water condenses, cools, or freezes, it loses energy and, thus, gives off heat. Water condensing into vapor releases an amount of energy equal to 600 calories per gram of water. When water freezes, it releases about 80 calories per gram. The heat released provides energy for storms to form.
What part of a hurricane is most damaging?
Floods caused by hurricane storm surges are the most destructive element. The low pressure center of a hurricane causes a mound of water to rise above the surrounding water. This hill of water is pushed by the hurricane's fierce winds and low pressure onto the land, where it floods coastal communities, causing significant damage. Hurricanes sometimes spark tornadoes that contribute to the devastation.
What is an aneroid barometer?
The word aneroid means without fluid, and so aneroid barometers do not need mercury in order to work. French inventor Lucien Vitti, 1805 to 1866, built upon a concept first proposed by German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz, 1646 to 1716. In which a metallic capsule surrounded by a vacuum could be used to measure air pressure. Using very thin pieces of metal, Vitti managed to connect such a capsule to highly sensitive dials displayed behind glass within an encasement. This was highly detailed work on the level of the finest clock craftsmanship. Aneroid barometers were very difficult to make in Vitti's time. But high-tech instruments are produced today using such devices as electron beams welding copper beryllium alloys. Because aneroid barometers are made of metal, they are also sensitive to changes in temperature and altitude. Bimetallic strips can be used to compensate for temperature, but altitude poses more of a problem. For this reason, aneroid barometers work best at elevations below 3,000 feet. About 915 meters, but they can be calibrated for higher altitudes if needed.
What was the deadliest tornado ever in the world?
On April 26, 1989, a tornado landed about 40 miles, 65 kilometers, north of Dhaka, Bangladesh. When it was over, 1,300 people were dead, 15,000 were hurt, and about 100,000 lost their homes.
How much land disappears when the sea level rises?
Scientists believe that as the sea water rises by 0.04 inches, 1 millimeter, the shoreline disappears by 4.9 feet, 1.5 meters. This means that if the sea level rises by 3.28 feet, 1 meter, the shorelines will extend another 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, inland.
Will there be an ice age in the future?
Yes, eventually the Earth will again cool and ice will cover land at higher latitudes and elevations. When this might happen, no one is really sure.
So, what is the modern theory of plate tectonics?
The Earth's crust and lithosphere are broken into over a dozen thin, rigid shells, or plates, that move around the planet over the plastic asthenosphere in the upper mantle. The interaction between these plates is called tectonics. From the Greek tekton for builder, plate tectonics describes the deformation of the Earth's surface as these plates collide, pass by, go over, or go under each other. In other words, plate tectonics describes how these plates move, but not why. Overall, plate tectonics combines Wegener's theory of continental displacement, or drift, and Hess's discovery of seafloor or spreading, sea below. The theory has truly revolutionized the study of the Earth's crust and deep interior. It allows scientists to study and understand the formation of such features as mountains, volcanoes, ocean basins, mid-ocean ridges, and deep-sea trenches, and to understand earthquakes and volcano formation. It also gives clues as to how the continents and oceans looked in the geologic past, and even how the climate and life forms evolved.
Does rain come in any other colors or is it always clear?
Yes, rain showers have occurred consisting of yellow or even reddish droplets. This usually happens when dust storms have seeded clouds heavily with nuclei rich in iron or other minerals. Yellow rain has also been observed as the result of pollens entering into clouds and then being absorbed into raindrops.
Who hires meteorologists?
Meteorologists can either work for the government or in the private sector. If they work for the government, they may be hired by a federal government agency or department, such as the National Weather Service, the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the Department of Energy, a national laboratory, or the military, or, they could be hired by state, county, or city governments. Local governments hire meteorologists to monitor such things as air pollution and other environmental and resource management concerns. In the private sector, meteorologists can find employment at television stations, including the popular The Weather Channel, airlines, universities, utility companies, climate research laboratories, meteorological equipment manufacturers, private research contractors and forecasting services, weather modification companies, private environmental organizations and companies, and even litigation support companies. A good place to start a job search is the job board postings on the American Meteorological Society's website at http://careercenter.amitsoc.org. If at all possible, start building career connections as early as you can, preferably while you are still in school. Through work internships and contacts through your professors or other people you meet.
What is the order of the colors in a rainbow?
The colors in a rainbow are those of a light spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, with the warm colors, red, orange, yellow, on the outside. Farthest from the ground, and the cool colors, blue, indigo, violet, closer to the ground.
What is aviation forecasting?
Aviation forecasting is a critical support service for the airline industry. Aviation forecasters warn pilots and airline management about potentially hazardous weather conditions that could lead to wind shear, wing icing, severe turbulence, strong winds, thunderstorms, or other dangers. While passengers might be frustrated by the delays in air travel that result from these warnings, aviation forecasting probably saves hundreds, even thousands, of lives every year. In addition to the worst-case scenarios that might occur if pilots were not warned of dangerous weather, aviation forecasters can also advise on wind conditions that can help save fuel by not having planes fly into head-on winds. When the cost of airline fuel rises, this has the potential of saving airlines billions of dollars.
What methods do farmers use to protect crops from frost and sudden freezes?
Frosts and freezes can prove to be a major hazard to crops, especially in warmer climes where such incidents are rare. Some crops, such as citrus fruits, are particularly vulnerable, and there have been many years where orange, lemon, avocado, and other such produce have been nearly wiped out in places such as Florida, California, and Texas because of a sudden frost. One method that has been used to protect crops is called a smudge pot. These are portable burners that create heavy clouds of smoke, which help to hold in warmer temperatures closer to the ground. Environmentalists do not favor this method, however, because it creates a lot of pollution. Another preventative strategy is to use huge wind machines. These giant fans blow warmer air downward onto the ground, circulating away the colder air that hangs low to the surface. Interestingly, farmers sometimes also coat their crops in ice to protect them from frost damage. Using sprinklers, they will spray the vegetation down, and, as long as the temperature does not drop below 25 degrees Fahrenheit. -4 degrees Celsius, the crops do better than if they are allowed to go unprotected from the frost.
Why do you sometimes see double rainbows?
Sometimes rainbows form that have a fainter twin called a supernumerary rainbow. The twin will be bigger and above the first rainbow, and the colors of the bands will be reversed. This occurs when not all of the light is reflected out of the raindrops at once. Some light energy remains, and is reflected within the droplets before emerging as a second rainbow.
Why was tornado forecasting once banned in the United States?
Concerns that warning people about possible tornado formation would panic. Residents led the Weather Bureau to ban such forecasting off and on in the 1940s. As meteorology improved and tornadoes became somewhat less terrifying in their ability to appear suddenly, the ban was lifted in 1950.
What is a temperature inversion?
Simply put, this is when temperatures in the troposphere, lowest layer of the atmosphere, are colder at lower altitudes than at higher altitudes, which is just the opposite of what normally occurs. Inversions can occur as the result of weather fronts moving through an area, or because of winds blowing over ground that is frozen over with ice or snow, or because of frigid lake or ocean conditions. When an inversion occurs, it prevents air from circulating vertically, which can result in pollutants being trapped at low altitudes. Inversions also disrupt radio and radar transmissions.
How is dry ice seeding used to increase visibility at airports?
When the weather has been cold enough, using dry ice has proved to be effective in clearing fog around airports. Unfortunately, conditions are right for this method only about 5% of the time in the United States.
Who invented the modern thermometer?
Ferdinand II de' Medici, 1610–1670, Grand Duke of Tuscany, was also an accomplished physicist. He is generally credited with inventing the first modern thermometer in 1641. It consisted of a sealed tube containing alcohol. This type of thermometer was called a spirit thermometer, possibly because alcoholic drinks are sometimes referred to as spirits. Today, alcohol thermometers are still referred to by this quaint label. Ferdinand II improved on his design in 1654, 10 years later, Robert Hooke, 1635 to 1703, adapted the Duke's thermometer, standardizing the measurements in a more logical way. The Duke had arbitrarily divided his thermometer into 50 degrees, using the freezing and boiling points of water as standards.
What is continentality?
Areas of a continent that are distant from an ocean, such as the central United States, experience greater extremes in temperature than do places that are closer to an ocean. These inland areas experience continentality. It might be very hot during the summer, but it can also get very cold in winter. Areas close to oceans experience moderating effects from the ocean that reduce the range in temperatures.
What was the Dust Bowl and what impact did it have on the United States?
The Dust Bowl drought and dust storms persisted, to varying degrees. From 1933 through 1939, devastating America's heartland. The worst drought years were in 1934 and 1939, and the worst dust storms occurred in 1935. The Dust Bowl turned once verdant farmlands into wastelands, and huge dust storms swept across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, and even eastern states. But dry, hot weather was not the only culprit. Farmers at the time used techniques that depleted the soil severely. Most did not rotate their crops or irrigate their lands the way we do so today. The result was that when severe drought hit, crops died, and the soil underneath was easily eroded. Strong winds blew the dirt into huge drifts, also sweeping away what little fertile soil was left. The impact of the Dust Bowl was not only loss of crops, but also a never-before-seen period of immigration. As former farmers abandoned their lands and, in many cases, headed out west to states such as California. Author John Steinbeck captured the plight of these people in his famous 1939 novel, The Grapes of Wrath. Photographers Dorothea Lange and Arthur Rothstein, among others, also recorded these terrible times for posterity in black and white photos while working for the Farm Security Administration. Today, the impact of the Dust Bowl can still be seen in America's central states. There remain many ghost towns that were once prosperous centers of commerce for local farm communities where the soil is still recovering.
What is a beaver tail?
A beaver tail is a colorful name for a broad, flat, descending cloud that can be seen during some rainstorms. Beaver tails usually form outside any areas of falling precipitation, and they tend to swirl inward toward a wall cloud.
What should I do in the event of a flood?
If a flood is expected, turn on your battery-powered radio and listen for information about when and where to evacuate. If a flood or flash flood is coming toward you, move quickly to a higher elevation, but don't ever try to outrun a flood. Also, don't drive through standing water, as it can quickly rise and stall your vehicle, possibly trapping you among swift water.
How did abrupt climate changes in the past come to be called Donsk-Gjerdeshger events?
Danish geophysicist Willy Donsk-Gjerde, 1922, discovered that by measuring the levels of oxygen isotopes and deuterium, a hydrogen isotope, in glaciers, as well as dust content and the acidity of ice, it was possible to reconstruct what the Earth's climate was in the past. He came about his conclusion by studying ice cores drilled out of glaciers in Greenland in the 1960s with Swiss physicist Hans Escher. 1927 to 1998, the inventor of the Escher counter, a radiation measuring device. Escher and Donsk-Gjerde drilled ice core samples dating back some 150,000 years in Earth's history. Layers in the ice showed that there had, in that time, been 24 abrupt changes in the world's climate. These are now called Donsk-Gjerdeshger events.
How do sunspots affect weather?
While scientists still debate how important or significant sunspot activity is on our weather and climate, there are some theories. In the short term, solar flares and winds do not influence weather to any significant extent, because the magnetosphere and upper atmosphere are more than capable of absorbing their energy. Over the long term, however, there could be consequences if the sun experienced a prolonged or permanent change in activity. Fluctuations in solar activity typically occur in the ultraviolet wavelengths, and UV radiation is known to affect the Earth's upper atmosphere. Astronomers and some meteorologists speculate that X-rays, too, resulting from sunspots and flares could, over time, change the amount of nitric oxide (NO) in the upper atmosphere, and this would have an effect on the ozone. Sunspot activity can result in more cosmic rays penetrating the atmosphere, which, in turn, spur on cloud formation and increase precipitation. More recently, there have been theories that significant decreases in solar activity predict oncoming ice ages on our planet. For example, during the Little Ice Age that lasted from the 15th through the 18th centuries, a period including the Maunder minimum, sunspot activity was at a low point. Other minimums, the Dalton minimum 1790 1820 and Sporer minimum 1420 to 1530, also coincide with colder weather.
What are northers?
Also known as blue northers. These are cold winds that blow southward from the Texas plains down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Is air really thin?
Like anything else, thin is a relative term. Compared to the vacuum of space, air is very dense. But compared to a chunk of marble, or even a bottle of water, it is very thin indeed. For something in a gaseous state, air is actually quite thick. At sea level, molecules in the air are spaced only about 1/millionth of an inch apart.
What are some of the most unusually hot temperatures experienced in the United States?
People sometimes fret about global warming when they experience an unusually warm day in winter or early spring. But very warm days during colder months are not unheard of and have been recorded since at least the early 20th century. For example, some atypical January temperatures include 84 degrees Fahrenheit 29 degrees Celsius in Los Animas, Colorado. In 1916, 79 degrees Fahrenheit 26 degrees Celsius in Choteau, Montana. In 1919, and 82 degrees Fahrenheit 28 degrees Celsius in Indianola, Nebraska. In 1894. More recently, in January 1997, Zapata, Texas, had a record 98 degrees Fahrenheit 36.7 degrees Celsius, and on March 31, 1998, Baltimore, Maryland, reached 97 degrees Fahrenheit 36.1 degrees Celsius, and Concord, New Hampshire, saw 89 degrees Fahrenheit 32 degrees Celsius. Probably the hottest December day recorded in North America was in La Mesa, California, which saw the thermometer climb to 100 degrees Fahrenheit 37.8 degrees Celsius.
How much does the entire atmosphere weigh?
If you were able to take all the gases in the air and place them on a scale, the total weight would be 5.1 quadrillion tons, 5.1 x 1015 tons, or 4.63 quadrillion metric tons.
What is the doctor?
This is an affectionate term, used in places such as the Caribbean, referring to the cool, refreshing sea breezes that make a hot day more bearable.
What was Hurricane Katrina?
Hurricane Katrina was the name given to the devastating hurricane that developed in the Atlantic Ocean, crossed the Gulf of Mexico, and struck New Orleans and many other cities along the southern coast of the United States in late August 2005.
How fast does the solar wind travel?
The flow of plasma out from the Sun is generally continuous in all directions, typically moving at speeds of several hundred kilometers per second. It can, however, gust out of holes in the solar corona at 2,200,000 miles per hour. 1,000 kilometers per second, or faster. As the solar wind travels farther from the Sun, it picks up speed, but it also rapidly loses density.
What is the solar spectrum?
The solar spectrum is what results when the Sun's light is broken up by raindrops, ice crystals, or other prisms into its component wavelengths. The shorter wavelengths are in the blue, indigo, and violet spectrum, while the longer wavelengths appear as red, yellow, and orange colors to the human eye.
What is the most dangerous U.S. state to live in due to tornadoes?
Massachusetts, because of its population density, has actually seen more deaths and severe injuries from tornadoes than any other U.S. state. However, it is still far riskier to live in Oklahoma, which gets hit by more tornadoes than any other state.
Can weather be predicted from the stripes on a woolly bear caterpillar?
It is an old superstition that the severity of the coming winter can be predicted by the width of the brown bands or stripes around the woolly bear caterpillar in the autumn. If the brown bands are wide, says the superstition, the winter will be mild. But if the brown bands are narrow, a rough winter is foretold. Studies at the American Museum of Natural History in New York failed to show any connection between the weather and the caterpillar's stripes. This belief is only a superstition, it has no basis in scientific fact.
Hey, wait a minute, weren't scientists warning us of an impending ice age back in the 1970s?
Beginning in 1970, there was considerable media attention given to speculation that Earth would soon see a new ice age. A scientific paper published in 1971 by S.I. Rasool and S.H. Schneider at the Institute for Space Studies is often cited as predicting an ice age. The paper was about the effects of aerosol levels in the atmosphere. The authors speculated such levels would rise by 600 to 800% over the next few years, and that this would trigger an ice age. What actually happened was that aerosol levels fell. Even if they hadn't, many scientists believe that Rasool and Schneider were inaccurate in their estimates about how carbon dioxide levels affected temperatures. Nevertheless, this publication and others that cited it drew the attention of the media, leading many people to believe that the next big climactic change would be a cooling off period.
Who first proposed the approach of numerical weather prediction?
Wilhelm Bjerknes, 1862–1951, a Norwegian physicist and meteorologist, was the author of the first formal studies on weather forecasting. He was also famous for his seminal 1921 book, On the Dynamics of the Circular Vortex with applications to the atmosphere and to atmospheric vortex and wave motion, which proposed the fundamental ideas behind numerical weather prediction in 1904. The theory was picked up again in 1922 by English mathematician and meteorologist Lewis F. Richardson. 1881–1953, the mathematics behind Bjerknes's theory appealed to Richardson, but the calculations necessary to come up with the predictions, in a time before the invention of the computer, were formidable. Richardson estimated it would take a coordinated effort of about 26,000 people using calculators to figure out the math fast enough for the numerical method to work. Trying to do some preliminary calculations himself, Richardson's early attempts at weather predictions were far off the mark. His misunderstanding of some of Bjerknes's numerical methods led him to come up with estimates on air pressure that were far too high. Because of Richardson's failure, numerical weather prediction was abandoned until the 1940s.
Is carbon dioxide pollution a problem?
While carbon dioxide occurs naturally in the environment, and, indeed, is essential to plant life, too much of even a good thing can be bad. Increased carbon dioxide levels, of course, are now infamous for leading to global warming. See the chapter on climate change for more on this. But near ground level this gas can also be poisonous to plants and animals. This became readily apparent during a 1990 incident in which carbon dioxide emissions from volcanic faults in California's Inyo National Forest killed trees and caused tourists to become dizzy and lightheaded. The tourists became ill while inside cabins, where the levels of carbon dioxide had increased to 25% of the air content.
What is the Arctic Oscillation?
Arctic oscillation is a measure of the differences in air pressure between air within the Arctic Circle and air that is between the circle and about 55 degrees north longitude. The Arctic oscillation can be either positive. Air pressure is lower over the Arctic region, or negative, the air pressure is higher. In the case of the former, winds become stronger across mid-latitude regions. Eurasia becomes warmer, and drier conditions prevail in the American West and the Mediterranean. Also, storms move farther north into Alaska and northern Europe. When the Arctic oscillation is negative, the opposite is mainly true. And the American West Coast and the Mediterranean experience wet weather, while Eurasia cools.
Can weather actually make pollution worse?
Yes, and it can alleviate it, as well. Rain, for instance, can wash away haze over cities, and wind can blow it away. Stagnant air masses, humid air, or temperature inversions, on the other hand, will allow pollution to build up. During the night, nocturnal inversions cause carbon monoxide to build up around freeways and other high-traffic areas. On the other hand, mixed layer conditions help to disperse pollutants when temperatures decrease over several thousand feet at a rate of about 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit 2.5 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 feet, about 300 meters, or so.
What are the Van Allen belts?
The Van Allen belts are two rings of electrically charged particles that encircle our planet. The belts are shaped like fat donuts, widest above Earth's equator and curving downward toward Earth's surface near the polar regions. These charged particles usually come toward Earth from outer space, often from the Sun, and are trapped within these two regions of Earth's magnetosphere. Since the particles are charged, they spiral around and along the magnetosphere's magnetic field lines. The lines lead away from Earth's equator, and the particles shuffle back and forth between the two magnetic poles. The closer belt is about 2,000 miles, 3,000 kilometers, from Earth's surface, and the farther belt is about 10,000 miles, 15,000 kilometers, away.
What was Hermann Flaun's contribution to climatology?
German meteorologist Hermann Flaun, 1912 to 1997, studied climate change on a macro scale. He conducted research on how large-scale changes in the Earth's climate, specifically how the entire atmosphere circulates, affect the environment. He was also one of the first to advance theories on how human beings affect the climate.
How much energy can a hurricane produce?
An average hurricane can strike with a force equivalent to about 400 hydrogen bombs, each packing 20 megatons of explosive power.
Why is Greenland called green when it is mostly covered in ice?
When Scandinavian explorers first discovered the large island north of Iceland in the late 10th century, they wished to attract more settlers to the land, and so they named it Greenland, according to some sources. Another explanation is that the island was actually named Gruntland. The word grunt meaning shallow bay. The name was later mistranslated on maps, becoming Greenland. While much of the island is inhospitably covered by a huge glacier, the southern coastline does actually have vegetation and has served as good fishing ground. The Little Ice Age of the 15th century decimated the Viking settlements, however.
Does wind have a lot of energy that could help reduce the need for fossil fuels?
If people could harvest all the energy in the Earth's wind through the use of windmills, for instance, it would generate about 3.6 million kilowatts of power. Enough to supply the energy needs of 3.6 billion Americans. Since Americans use much more energy than most people on the planet, it is safe to say that the energy needs of the nearly 7 billion people on Earth could be met by wind power alone. Unfortunately, it would be impossible to extract all of this energy. Wind turbines have become economically feasible, but we could never place them over every land and sea surface on the planet.
What is inversion?
When the air temperature rises with altitude rather than cooling, the condition is called an inversion.
What is universal coordinated time?
Meteorologists, as well as many other scientists, use the standard of universal coordinated time, UTC, as a time reference to coordinate their measurements. Also known as Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, because Greenwich, England, is the place where the standard time is set. As well as Zulu or Z time, UTC employs the 24-hour clock also used by the military. Thus, 0000 UTC indicates midnight and 1200 UTC is noon. A standard set by meteorologists is to make observations every 6 hours at 0000, 0600, 1200 and 1800 UTC.
What are some of the worst floods in history caused by inclement weather?
Not all lethal floods in recorded history have been caused by bad weather. For example, seawall failures in the Netherlands have, on several occasions, caused tragic floods that killed thousands. The table below, though, lists some of the worst weather-related floods in history.
What is a mesocyclone?
A mesocyclone is the vortex of air usually between 1 to 6 miles, 2 to 10 kilometers in diameter, often found within a supercell or other large thunderstorm with cumulonimbus clouds. Wind shear resulting in abrupt changes in wind direction or speed in the storm causes air to circulate in a rolling fashion parallel to the ground. An updraft can then orient the swirling air vertically, thus forming a vortex perpendicular to the ground.
Why are trees and other vegetation important to the weather and climate?
Cutting down trees, especially on the massive scale that is occurring today, has a definite effect on the weather in several ways. 1. Trees and other plant life absorb carbon dioxide and other pollutants that cause global warming. 2. Plants also absorb sunlight and areas covered by forest, thus reflecting less sunlight back into the atmosphere. 3. Trees near homes and commercial buildings help reduce electricity use, because they keep buildings cooler in the summer and serve as a barrier against cold winds in the winter.
How large can hailstones become?
The average hailstone is about 1/4 inch, 0.64 centimeter, in diameter. However, hailstones weighing up to 7.5 pounds, 3.4 kilograms, are reported to have fallen in Hyderabad state in India in 1939. Although scientists think these huge hailstones may be several stones that partly melted and stuck together. On April 14, 1986, hailstones weighing 2.5 pounds, 1 kilogram, were reported to have fallen in the Gopalganj district of Bangladesh. There was also a report of a hailstone weighing 4.5 pounds, 2.04 kilograms, in Germany. The current claim to fame for largest hailstone found in the United States was one that was measured to have a circumference of 18.75 inches, 47.625 centimeters, that fell in Aurora, Nebraska, in June 2003. Before that, the record was held by a 17.5 inch, 44.45 centimeter, stone found in Coffeyville, Kansas, in September 1970. When it comes to weight, however, the Coffeyville stone was 1.67 pounds, 0.76 kilograms, while the Aurora hailstone was a fluffier 1.3 pounds, 0.59 kilograms.
What is humidity?
Humidity refers to the amount or saturation of water vapor in the air, depending on air temperature and pressure. The air can contain differing amounts of humidity before the vapor turns into actual precipitation.